Well, let's bring in Breen Roulette. He joins us from Vancouver in British Columbia. He's a lawyer and also a former counsel for the National Inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Breen, thank you for your time today. As we were hearing there from Mary Simon, she says this is progress. Is this symbolism or a real attempt at change, do you think?
Well, when I listened to her say an important step forward on the long path towards reconciliation, to me, and to many Indigenous people, this signals that we should expect from her the same slow pace of successive Canadian governments over many decades, including the current government. To me, it's very troubling in this context that a country that's being accused of genocide by its own federal commission, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, is still signaling to us that it's going to take a slow, measured approach. I do not believe that genocide is a crime that should be tolerated for any amount of time, let alone the long path towards reconciliation alluded to by the new Governor General. I think that it deserves immediate attention.
Breen, I do want to ask you, though, because change is sometimes iterative, and even if this is symbolic, this is surely a step that speaks to a broad, albeit slow, as you're saying, shift in Canada's thinking about its own identity?
Well, it's a symbolic change, and you're right. More people are becoming aware that Canada has a history of genocide. But many are still refusing to acknowledge that it has a current and ongoing genocide against Indigenous peoples. And that was the allegation of the National Inquiry, not just that it's historical, but that it is current and ongoing. And I also allege that the Canadian government has enshrined apartheid in the Constitution Act of 1867. And as long as apartheid is at the core of this country's laws, we will not see real change. We really need the International Criminal Court to come in and investigate the ongoing genocide and apartheid in Canada.
Well, there are clearly some questions, ongoing questions around accountability, but just turning back to Ms. Simon's role, I mean, I understand it's primarily ceremonial, but she has previously taken some fairly strong stances on big political issues like Arctic drilling, for instance. Now, given the conversation that you and I and people around the world are having around Indigenous issues in Canada at the moment, do you think because she's taking this role, she could have some real political influence here?
Well, as someone who's also formerly worked in Indigenous governance, I know that Indigenous governments like the ITK, of which she was president, and the MNC and the AFN are heavily dependent on the Canadian government for their funding. And Canada uses that dependency to coerce Indigenous governments to do work as Canada sees fit. So it's my belief that the selection of Ms. Simon by Prime Minister Trudeau is likely because he's comfortable with her past track record, that she won't rock the boat very much and that she will toe the line and protect the government of Canada. Yeah. We need something more courageous than that right now.
Breen, I understand Ms. Simon herself has come under fire for not speaking French, but I understand that's also because she wasn't actually allowed to learn it at the day school she attended, not dissimilar to some of the residential schools that we've been talking about. I know you've raised these questions of accountability, but given that she now has higher profile, is that likely to create more of a conversation around that at least?
It may, and it may not. Language has been denied a lot of Indigenous people, including people that haven't attended at residential schools. But generations ago, like my grandparents, they didn't teach my father our Indigenous languages because they were afraid that doing so would cause him to be taken to residential schools. So they undertook to keep that from him, to protect him from being physically taken. A lot of horrible things have been done by the Government of Canada beyond residential schools. And we need to look at residential schools, but we also need to look at the current problems with child apprehensions by governments in Canada. Indigenous children currently represent roughly half the children in foster care, and that is statistically anomalous given that the population is 5 to 7% of Canada.
Clearly an incredibly, incredibly long way to go. Breen Ouellette there, a former counsel for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in Canada. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us on Al Jazeera, Breen.
Thank you very much.